Hello everybody and welcome back to another BlenderMadeEasy tutorial. Today I'm going to be showing you how to create a fire trail using Mantaflow and Dynamic Paint. To achieve this, we're going to be using a curve and we're going to have an object follow this curve, and we're going to be using that in the Dynamic Paint, and then from there we're going to be importing that data into the fire simulation. If none of that made sense to you, don't worry, we're going to go step by step and I'll show you exactly how to do it. First off, we need to create the outline of where the fire simulation is going to be. To do this, we're going to be using a curve. I'm going to go ahead and press X and delete the default cube, and then press Shift A, and we're going to be adding in a reference image. What I want to do is actually trace out the Blender logo. So just go over to Google and type in Blender logo and you'll find the image that I used. Select it and then go load reference image. We can see that it loaded in at this angle. We don't want this, we want it to be flat on the ground. So I'm gonna hit Alt G and then Alt R to snap it to the grid just like that. From there, we can go into top view by pressing 7, and then I'll zoom in. I'm gonna press Shift A and we're gonna go over to curve and then Bezier curve. Then I'll go into edit mode and then press G to move and place it over here. Make sure you are in edit mode so the origin point is still at the center. Then we're going to select these points and then rotate them and start tracing out this logo. So this part is a little bit tedious, but all you have to do is just select one of the handles, rotate them, scale them down a little bit, select a different handle, rotate it, and then place it along the logo just like this. And if the reference image is too visible, what you can do is select it, go over to this panel, the image panel right here, use transparency, and then bring the opacity down a little bit. This will help you see the curve a little bit better. So once you've done that, select the curve again and just start extruding it and placing it in just like this. So what I'm going to do now is actually fast forward this bit because it is a little bit tedious. It's just the same thing, scaling, rotating all the way around. And once we get up to this part, I'll show you how to do this circle. Once you get over to this corner right here, what I like to do is scale down the curve handle really small and place it on that corner, and then press E to extrude and drag it out this way. Having it really small will make it a tight angle, as you can see there. So we'll place it like this. And then for here, since this is a straight line, we can just drag this all the way over to right about here. Make sure you leave it about halfway through because this is where we're going to transition over to this side. Alright, once you have gotten to this point, what we're going to do is actually select both of these handles, go into front view by pressing 1, and extrude them down. We'll place them right about there, and then we'll go back into top view. Then we're going to extrude it going along this way to this spot. The reason why we're going down is because when we apply the dynamic paint, an object is going to paint along this curve. It'll go from here, go down, cut across, and then come back up over here. We don't want there to be a line between this point and this point. We want it to be underneath. Now that we've extruded it down, we can press E to extrude and drag it out this way. You also want to make sure that these points are pretty close together, so I'll select both of them and just scale them inwards a little bit so they're closer together, like that. And then over on this point, once we've reached this circle, we can go back into edit mode. I'll rotate these around this way so they're facing the right direction, like this. And then we'll extrude both of these, so select them both, go into front view, press E to extrude, and drag them up till they're the same height as the other part of the curve, right about there. And then it's just the same thing, we're just going to extrude them and then go around this circle. So I'll select this point right here, and then I'll extrude it out this way. Rotate it so it's facing the right direction, looks like that is good. Scale it up and then place it along this part of the logo. Once you have gone all the way around, select both the handles at the end and then press F to fill in a face right there. Now they are connected. So now this curve is one solid loop. It goes all the way around. And there we go. We've now created the logo traced out with a curve. The next step is to apply an object to follow this curve. I'm going to press Shift A and add in a mesh and then a UV sphere. We'll scale this UV sphere down and just leave it right at the center. It doesn't really matter where it's at. Next up, we're going to go over to the Constraints tab, which is this tab right here. click Add Constraint, and then Follow Path. If we select the Bezier curve with the target right here, select the Bezier curve, now we can see it's on that point. I'll scale it down even more. What we can do next is click on Animate Path, and now this object will follow this curve. If I hit the spacebar, we can see exactly what it's doing, and this is what it looks like. Now, when I first started making this simulation, a friend pointed out to me that fire doesn't go in one direction, it actually spreads in both directions. So what we need to do is actually duplicate both of these objects and have another object going in the opposite direction. I'm going to scale this UV sphere down just a little bit more. So what we're going to do is select both of these objects, the curve and the UV sphere, Shift D them, and then right click. Make sure you name these so you know exactly what you're doing. So the Bezier curve here, we're going to go with curve and then left, and then this curve will be curve and then right because it's going to go in the opposite direction. Same thing over here. This first UV sphere is going to be left, and the second UV sphere is going to be right. Another thing that we need to do is with this second curve, the curve left, we can see these arrows are going in the right direction. We don't want this. We don't want them to be going in the opposite direction. So to flip a direction of a curve, you can select everything, right click, and then click on Switch Direction. Once we do this, you will notice the arrows are pointing in this direction, and that is what we want. So now once we restart the animation and hit the spacebar, you will notice that the UV spheres are going in opposite directions. Next up, they're currently going way too fast, so I'm going to select the curve left and then go over to the curve settings. Under path animation, you will notice this value here. This controls the amount of frames that it'll take to go around the entire loop. I want this to be pretty slow, so I'm going to set this to 300. Select curve right and set it to the exact same number, 300. So now that we've set up the frame number, we're going to go ahead and position the UV spheres on the curve where we want. So what we can do is select them, go over to the Constraints tab, and here we have an offset. This controls where it is on the curve when it starts. I want them to be both down here, and then I want them to go in either direction at the same time. So what we can do is actually set the offset all the way to here. We'll select this UV sphere as well, bring up the offset until it's all the way to there. Now if we play the simulation, you can see this is what it looks like. Now another thing that we want to do is have them meet at this spot at the same time. So we can see here this object is at this spot way before this one, so we need to mess with the offset a little bit more. If we select this object, I'm going to restart the simulation, we probably need to position both of them over here. So I'm going to drag this one over to the left, then we'll select this one, drag it even further down here, and then we'll try this. If I play this, we can see they split at the same time, and then we can see here it still is a little bit too fast, so what we can do is just restart it, position it a little bit more to the left, so bring it down this way, select the other one, bring it over here, and that should be good. And this is what it looks like. They go all the way around the logo, they meet at that spot, and then split at the same time. So now that we've set up our animation, we can set up the dynamic paint. So first off, we actually need an object to paint on. I'm going to select the reference image and just press H to hide it. We're not going to need it anymore. And then I'm going to press Shift A and add in a plane. Scale this plane up to be about the same size as the logo, so right about there is good. Now what we need to do is actually subdivide this plane. So I'm going to go into Edit Mode, right click, and select Subdivide. If we open up this panel down at the bottom right here, we can set the number of cuts up to a higher value. Let's try 75. That looks pretty good, but we still need a little bit more, so I'm just going to right click and subdivide that whole thing, and now we have a lot more geometry to work with. What we can do next is apply the dynamic paint. So if we go over to the Physics tab with the plane selected, I'm going to click on Dynamic Paint, make sure the type is set to Canvas, and click on Add Canvas. The format we're going to leave at Vertex, and now what we need to do is find where they meet. So it looks like they meet right about here at frame 50, 151. So what we're going to do is set the end frame in the dynamic paint to 151. We also need to turn up the substeps, and what this does is it will calculate fast moving objects. Now these UV spheres aren't moving extremely fast, but we should bring this up just in case it misses a couple of spots. So for the substeps, let's try a value of 5. I think that's pretty good, and that's all we really need to do. The surface type, we don't want paint, we actually want weight, because this is what we're going to be using in the fire simulation. Underneath the output, make sure you add in a new vertex group. If you don't do this, this is not going to work, so make sure you click that plus sign. Underneath the cache settings, if we open up this panel, you will notice it's completely grayed out. The reason for this is because we have not saved our project yet. So what we can do is press Ctrl S and I'll save it to this folder. And once we do that, you can see the cache is now visible. Before we bake this in, we also need to create the paintbrushes, and in this case, it's going to be these UV spheres. Select them, Dynamic Paint, set the type over to Brush, and click Add Brush. And that's basically all we really need to do. Select the other one as well, Dynamic Paint, set the type over to Brush, Add Brush, and there we go. And now that we've done that, we can select our plane right here, scroll down to the cache settings, and then click on Bake. We can see here it baked pretty fast, and now once we apply the fire simulation, we can select that vertex group that we just created. I'm going to go ahead and close off this tab, then we'll create the fire simulation. Go over to Object, down to Quick Effects, and then click on Quick Smoke, and this will automatically add a domain for us. This is currently way too big though, so I'm going to scale it down this way, and then press S and Z and scale it down this way so it's a lot smaller. We don't need that big of a domain. The resolution that I'm going to use is a value of 128. For my final animation at the beginning of the video, I actually used 256, but that does take quite a long time to bake and render, so for this tutorial, we're going to be using 128. I'm also going to turn on Adaptive Domain, and this will speed up the baking time as well. The vorticity of the smoke, we're going to drag up to a value of 0.3, so it adds some more swirls into the smoke. Underneath the fire, we are going to change a couple of settings here. First off, we're going to be using a texture for the inflow, and this will make the flames a lot shorter. So what we need to do to counteract that is actually make the flames taller over here. So I'm going to set this to a value of 0.7, and this will bring the height of the flames up a little bit. The vorticity of the flames, I'm going to bring up to a value of 0.8, and this will give them more swirls and more randomness. Also, one thing to note is if your bake button is missing, and I've gotten a lot of comments about that, the reason the bake button is missing is because of the type. Right now it's set to replay. This means if I play my simulation, it'll actually play in real time. I've noticed though when using the replay option is it's very inconsistent and doesn't give accurate results. So I recommend switching over to modular, and this will give you your bake button right here, and this will give you a lot more accurate results. The end frame right here, we're going to be setting up to a value of 180 because the simulation lasts to 150. I want about 30 frames extra to just view the logo. The end frame right here, I'm also going to set to 180. And now that we've done that, we can mess with the inflow object. Select the plane and then come over to the flow type and set it over to fire. The flow behavior, we're going to leave at inflow. Make sure you use that and not geometry. And then underneath the vertex group, select the vertex group that we just created for the dynamic paint. This will give us the spot of the plane that will actually have the fire. Underneath the texture, make sure you enable this, and we're going to create a new texture, and this will give the fire a much more realistic look. If we go over to the texture panel, we can create a new one. The type, we're going to be using clouds. The size of the texture is currently way too big, and this will give us some really splotchy look to the fire, so we need to bring this down. I'm going to try a value of 0.1. Going back over to the physics tab, we're going to select that texture in the texture panel right here, and then the size of this we're also going to bring down to a value of 0.5. One more thing that we need to do with this texture is to offset it. Currently it's in the exact same position, and it's going to be like that through the entire animation, and this will not look very good. So what we need to do is actually offset this so the texture will move around as the simulation plays. Make sure you're on frame 1 and then click this little button on the side to add in a keyframe. Go all the way to the end of the animation, frame 180, and set the offset up to a value of 0.8. Then add another keyframe. Whenever you animate something in Blender, the default way of the interpolation is a curve. This will smooth out the animation, so it will start out slow, speed up, and then slow down at the end. With this texture though, that will look pretty strange on our fire, so we need to make sure this is linear. To fix this, open up the graph editor, switching this over to the graph editor right here. This is our curve. So you can see here, it starts out slow, speeds up, and slows down at the end. To switch it over to a straight line, we can press T and click on linear. Now it's a constant rate going all the way across. The last thing that we can do to make our simulation look a little bit more realistic is to add in some wind. I'm going to press Shift A and go underneath a force field and then click on wind. Go into front view by pressing 1 and then rotate this 90 degrees just like this. So the wind is going in this direction. Over in the physics tab, you can set the strength right here. I'm going to bring this down to a value of 0.5. I'm also going to animate this, so I'm going to click I while hovering over the strength. Over in the graph editor, we can see this is our animation. It's staying at 0.5 through the entire animation. What we can do is press N and add a modifier to this to give it some more randomness. Over in the modifier tab, if we click add modifier and noise, now we can see this is what it looks like. This value here controls the scale. We need to drag this up a lot bigger, something like this. The strength of this, if we drag this up, we can see the curve becomes a lot bigger. I'm going to bring it up to a value of 1.1. So basically what's going to happen is the strength of this wind is going to be at 0.4 at the start. It's going to go down to almost 0, then it's going to go up to almost 1, and it's going to be random throughout the entire animation. This will give it a cool effect when we actually simulate the fire. You also want to be careful with the strength value that you don't go underneath 0 because it'll become a negative value and the wind will actually go in the opposite direction. I want the wind to be always in this direction, but I want to make sure the strength is random. And now that we've done that, we can bake in our simulation. I'm going to go ahead and close off this tab, select the domain, and then click on Bake Data. Make sure you save your project before you do this just in case it crashes, and Bake Data. The bake has now finished. If we play our simulation, this is what it looks like. As you can see, the fire does look pretty good. There is a lot of randomness in the texture, the wind is giving it a cool effect, and I think it looks pretty sweet. If we skip all the way to the end, we can see the Blender logo right there, and it looks pretty cool. The next step is to set up the lighting and material for the fire. Before we do that, let's organize our scene a little bit because we have a lot of objects on the right. I'm going to create a new collection, and I'm going to drag the 2 cylinders, the 2 curves, and the empty right here, the image reference, drag them all into this collection. And then I'll close that off. I'm also going to hide that from the view, and if we open up this menu and select the camera icon, we can also hide it from the rendered view as well. Next up, select the domain and then go over to the material tab. If we open up the volume, this is what our current material looks like. I'm also going to be using cycles for this animation because I find that it looks much better than Eevee. If we go into render view, this is what it currently looks like. We don't have any fire. To fix this, we need to turn up the black body intensity. If I drag this all the way to a value of 10, now we can see the fire in our scene and it looks pretty cool. To make this render a little bit faster, we can also turn off the density of the smoke to a value of 0, and this will get rid of it entirely and just leave the fire. Next up, I'm going to select the lamp in our scene and press X and delete it. This next part took a little bit too long, so I decided to speed it up and just talk over it. Basically, I just added an HDR. I set the strength to a value of about 0.1, so it darkens up the whole scene. And then what I did next was add in a plane, scale it up a little bit, position the camera above the fire, drag it back, and as you can see there, this is what it looks like. For the render settings, I'm going to bring the render sampling to 50 because I do want this to render pretty quickly. And I'm also going to go underneath the render layers panel and turn on denoising data. Now if we go over to the compositor, we can click on use nodes. We can see a lot more options in the render layers. We have noisy image, denoise right here, and albedo. I'm going to press Shift A and add in a filter and then a denoise right here. We're going to take the noisy image, plug that into the denoise, the normal, and then the albedo and plug that in right there. If we then take the image and plug that into the composite, now there will be no noise in our render and it will look much better. The next step is to set an output of where you want your animation to go to. I just selected this folder and I'm also going to be rendering this out as PNGs. We're not going to be using a movie file just in case Blender crashes or I need to stop the render. Using an image sequence, we can always start at the frame that we left off. Once you're happy with all of your settings and your output, you can go over to render and then click on render animation. This will bring up a new window and it will start to render out our scene. The render has finished, and if we exit out of this window, we can go over to render and then click on view animation. It will take all of those images and play the animation for us in real time. And here is the results. As you can see, it looks pretty cool. So there you go guys, that is how you create a fire trail in Blender. If you want to learn how to render those images into a movie file, I will put a link down in the description where you can learn that. But that's going to be it for this tutorial. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed or created your own animation, I would love to see it, so make sure to send it to me over on Instagram at BlenderMadeEasy. If you have suggestions for other tutorials you would like to see, make sure you comment down below. That's going to be it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.